spot where they were blocked, and we carry on. And in most cases, I find that if we've worked through the confession of sin or the forgiveness prayers, that what is blocking the early part of the inner healing process is set free. And they're able to carry on and connect with the memory and connect with the words that are attached to the memory. And the process, in the majority of cases, is able to carry on smoothly. So that's the process dealing with unforgiveness. The third area of blockage that you may run into is the subject that I call mental agreements. As we've been learning, words are important. But mental agreements even goes beyond words. It goes to the commitment that a person places on the words. In Matthew 12:37 it says, "For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned." And so what happens is the words that we use and the commitment that we have to these words have power. And when we agree on something in our mind, that has a level of strength to it that is causing an individual to be more firm and to be more fixed and rigid than just words of a lie. And in a sense, it's relating to what we're binding on earth and whether we're binding on earth what is bound in heaven. It's the sense of what are we binding our mind to? What are we connecting our mind to? And in the process of doing this, we are making agreements. And there's several ways that these agreements can be made. The first is what's called a vow. A vow is when you use your own words and you create the statement yourself and you say, I choose to do something. And an example would be, I will never speak to that person again. What an individual is doing when they say that is, I am agreeing with myself that I am committing myself to never speak to that person again. And it has a sense of eternal quality to it. Never again. And so you can hear the strength of that statement. And so a vow has power. Similarly, a curse has power. And in my definition, a curse is when someone else creates the words and they bring the words and they say the words to you and then you accept them. So let's say a person says to you, I curse you with bad health. If you don't accept those words, if you say, no, sorry, don't accept those words, then the curse doesn't land and the curse has no power. But if you listen to those words and you say to yourself, wow, I've been cursed with ill health. I'm going to have bad health. I better worry that I'm going to have bad health. I agree with myself that I am going to have bad health because I've been cursed. Then what that person does is they open themselves up to the spirits that will manifest illness and make them believe that they really are sick, and it will have power. A third type of mental agreement is a covenant. And a covenant requires two people agreeing with each other about something. The best example is a marriage covenant, where two people say their vows to each other. They're making a covenant together to deal with that subject. So a covenant could be like two young boys cutting their fingers and putting the blood together and agreeing that they're going to become blood brothers. That's a covenant, and that has power. And I read about lots of situations in Africa where there are blood ceremonies where covenants are made using blood. Now, spirit ties is another example of where one individual becomes very close to another individual and they're spiritually involved with each other. And they agree on something, but when they agree on it, it's not according to God's will, or it's not according to God's knowledge or truth. And so an example of a spirit tie would be two women in a church agreeing that they don't like the pastor and they want to get rid of the pastor, so they both pray that God will remove the pastor from the church. That's an example of a spirit tie. What God would really want them to be praying is that God's will would be done for the church related to the leadership. But when they take over God's role and they make their own determination and with their wills agree together and put their spirits together and pray in a spiritual way related to that, then a spirit tie is created. One that we've talked previously about is the one called the soul tie. And the soul tie is different than the spirit tie in that it requires blood or sexual intercourse, deep intimacy, or pain. That something more is required for a soul tie to be created than just two people agreeing with each other. And so there are groups of people who are involved in things like witchcraft who know some of these principles, and they create soul ties through their ceremonies. Another type of mental agreement is what is called a guardian lie. And a guardian lie is a general agreement that a person says to their own self that blocks the healing process. An example of a guardian lie would be, Jesus Christ heals other people, but he won't heal me. I agree with myself that he will not heal me. And when that guardian lie is in place, then it is true that Jesus will not be able to help that person because that person's will is set against Jesus helping them. What they've done is they've made an agreement that blocks out Jesus from coming and doing a healing. And so a guardian lie is like an umbrella. And I've had some people who at the very beginning of an inner healing process will say the words, "It's not going to work. It won't work for me. This process won't work," even before they've given it a chance, because they've got a guardian lie working in their life that says, this process isn't going to be helpful to me, or I can't be helped, or Jesus won't come and help me, or I'm not good enough to be helped, or whatever the logic or the language is. But that guardian lie is in place that's blocking the process. Another type of curse that I lump into this mental agreement category is what's called generational curses. And in a sense, what it is the family culture and the family story is creating words in an individual that they agree with. And so maybe a person looks at the alcoholism in the family line and they say, my grandfather was an alcoholic, and my father's an alcoholic, and I'm an alcoholic, and that's just the way it is. I commit my mind to agreeing with myself that alcoholism is in our family, and I accept it, and I am in agreement with that. Or another example would be related to suicide, where there's been generational suicide, and the way people deal with problems is by killing themselves. And so the individual says in their own mind, in my family, the way people deal with something that's really bad is they take their own life. And I agree with that. I come into an agreement with that that's how my grandfather did it, that's how my father did it, and so this is how I'm going to choose to deal with my problem, is by committing suicide. So that would be an example of how a generational agreement works in a person's life. And there may be other agreements that a person has made, and so there is a prayer in the training manual that you can take them through. And the key aspects of dealing with a mental agreement is, first of all, the renunciation. What they're doing is they're choosing with their will to renounce the mental agreement. I renounce the beliefs, thoughts, and attitudes that I've held in my mind when I committed to agree with myself that, and whatever that mental agreement is. Secondly, the individual needs to state with their own voice that the mental agreement that they have been living with is a lie. It's not a truth. And that they choose to break that lie and to declare it to be null and void, and that they choose to live under its power and authority no longer. And so those are the sort of key pieces of the breaking of a mental agreement. The renouncing, the declaring it to be a lie, the breaking of its power, the declaring it to be null and void. But what happens after it's been broken is that the mental agreement needs to be replaced with something. So for example, in inner healing, when a lie is replaced with truth, in mental agreements, a curse needs to be replaced with a blessing. Or a vow needs to be replaced with a positive vow. Or a mental agreement that's against the knowledge of God needs to be replaced with a new mental agreement that is connected to what God wants, what connects with God's will. And so part of the process after breaking the mental agreement is praying and listening to the Lord to reveal what is the new agreement that the person is supposed to become committed to in their mind. And so what you need to do is help that individual come up with the new words that they are going to commit to that will replace what was there in the first place. And so for some individuals in the inner healing process, this may be the very first block that you run into. Even before you get started, the person may say, this isn't going to work for me, and a mental agreement is blocking the process. And so that's what you need to go to. So what I tend to look for, as shown on the very back addendum, which is the guide to the process, is the thinking rigid, fixed, inflexible? Are there vows? Are there curses? Have they set their mind in a way that has created a mental agreement? Sometimes they're very subtle. Sometimes they seem innocuous, and yet this area of mental agreements was the last type of blockage that I learned about. And the more you start to learn about mental agreements, the more you start to see how people use their mind to create this type of thinking to block the healing process. The fourth type of blockage that I'd like to talk about is what I call lack of self-forgiveness. Often Christians live in environments that tend to be judgmental and in some cases legalistic. And the family of origin can have a black and white approach to the person's life, and they may hear criticism and they may hear judgment, and you start to hear in the person's story things like guilt, shame, pride, self-punishment, self-loathing or anger, unbelief, self-justification. These are the symptoms. This is a less common type of blockage, but when it's there, it's very powerful. It affects the person in a very significant way. And so what I do when I sense that the person is starting to talk about guilt is I lead them through the story that's in the chapter in the training manual on the subject of self-forgiveness. And what I start with is the subject of a bad feeling. Now, once again, this is an example where feelings mislead. The bad feeling of having sinned causes the person to have what is called in 2 Corinthians 7 a worldly sorrow. And a worldly sorrow is a self-centered sorrow where the person is feeling bad about their self. And because they feel that their sin is so bad that they need to punish themselves for it. They know that Jesus Christ wants to forgive them. But in essence, this is what it looks like. If this is Jesus and this is the person, what the individual does is they turn their back to Jesus Christ and they say, I know I'm bad, and I know you want to forgive me, and you want to love me, but I need to be punished. And I know I need to be punished, and if you're not going to punish me, then I'm going to punish myself. And they start to punish themselves through verbal self-talk that is very negative. And in essence, what the individual is doing is saying, I live in a performance-oriented society. I know that something needs to be done here to deal with this sin and this bad feeling. And so I'm going to take responsibility myself for getting rid of this. I'm going to self-justify. And so the definition of guilt is choosing to atone for one's own sin through self-punishment. And as I take the person through the story, I say that it goes like this. First of all, you become aware of what it is that you did. Secondly, you start to criticize yourself and blame yourself. You then judge and accuse and condemn and shame yourself. And along with this comes a self-hatred and a self-anger and a self-loathing. Next is self-punishment, even to the point of self-destruction. Some people get into cutting, some people actually physically hurt themselves. And then fatigue becomes a part of it. The mind becomes confused. There's hopelessness and helplessness. And the person is really starting to get lost in the darkness. And depression starts to emerge, and suicidal thoughts, and even to the point of an individual killing themselves. And what's happening through this process is Satan is leading you down this path of darkness, deeper and deeper, into a small, dark place that the people describe as either a black pit or a box or a prison or some place where they're all alone and they're dark and they're contained. And Satan has stolen their energy, has stolen their mind, and has stolen their ability to go back and change the original sin. You see, that's really the purpose of Satan, is to stop you from going back and changing the sin. On the next page in the training manual is God's approach. And it's called godly sorrow. And godly sorrow is the opposite of self-centered. It's looking out of yourself and starting to feel what other people are feeling. Instead of feeling, I'm bad, I'm terrible, I'm all of these negative things, it's, when I did that to that person, they were really hurt. That's a godly sorrow, getting out of yourself and being selfless and starting to understand, I did something wrong and I shouldn't have done that. And that godly sorrow leads you to confession. And as you confess, the next step is to receive the forgiveness that God offers. Now, what many people do is they sin, they know they've done something wrong, they confess, but then they go straight to guilt and back into that whole destructive cycle that I described previously. The key to God's healing process is receiving the forgiveness. And when a person chooses to receive the forgiveness, they're free. They're not in bondage, they're not in a prison, they're free. And what is Jesus' purpose for setting people free? First of all, he wants to empower them. He wants to give them energy, not steal their energy. And he wants to give them all the strength that they have to be able to change, to repent, to live a more holy life, and to live a way that would please God. Now, one of the things that does is that it enables the person to go back and change what started the whole process. It helps them to change that original sin. And so God's desire is to give us the ability to be the best that we can be. But Satan leads people through the process of unforgiveness for self, of not receiving the forgiveness from God, and going into this negative self-talk that leads a person down into that dark pit. Now, when I take people through that story, there's some people who say, every word in there relates to me. Or some people will say, the words that are connected to the first half of that connect to me, but not the bottom half. But they're able to identify with the words in that story. The example that I use from the Bible is Judas. Judas sinned by turning an innocent Jesus into the authorities. And they paid him 30 silver coins. And what the Bible says is he felt remorse. He felt bad. He knew he'd done something wrong. So he went back to those authorities and he said, here are the 30 coins, take them back, Jesus is innocent. And they said, that doesn't matter, we have Jesus now, you keep the coins, get lost. And so he threw the coins away and he felt so bad that he went into the mental anguish and the mental turmoil until finally he killed himself. Judas is the example of the one who led himself through the self-centered, worldly sorrow for himself that it led him to killing himself. And so, guilt is about death. It's about spiritual death. On the other hand, confession and receiving forgiveness is about life.